BBC News. One main story this hour: Joe Biden and Donald Trump have fiercely criticised each other's records on law and order as they continue their campaigns for the White House. Let's have more on this. We can speak to Justin Leroy, Assistant Professor at the University of California, Davis. I know you specialise in African American history. Very good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. It is quite possible, isn't it, that this law and order issue, which of course means very different things to different people, will play quite well for President Trump?
It is likely. He's really painted Biden into a corner by accusing Biden of being a socialist, by accusing Biden of being someone who endorses violence. And I think Biden's response to condemn the violence on so-called both sides is expected, but also disappointing. Biden has said numerous times that he was inspired to run for president in the wake of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, after which President Trump famously said that there were very fine people on both sides, referring to white supremacist protesters and counter-protesters. And so Biden's tactic is to try and deflect some of that criticism by presenting Black Lives Matter protesters and counter-protesters, many of whom are associated with extremist or white supremacist organizations, as equally violent. And that's simply not the case, right? Getting shot in the back.
Forgive me, I was just going to ask you on that particular point. There are bound to be, well, there clearly are, looking at my feed, many people on the left who are offended by what Mr. Biden is saying. I suppose the calculation in the Biden election campaign is, where else are those voters going to go? They're hardly going to vote for Mr. Trump.
Exactly. But the risk is that many of those voters will stay home instead of voting for Biden, despite not being in agreement on many issues. And I think the real miscalculation on Biden's part is taking people being killed by police officers, by protesters who cross state lines with semi-automatic weapons as the same type of violence as property damage. Property damage is property damage. It's not violence.
There are some signs, though, in the polls, aren't there, that Mr. Trump's lines about anarchist violence, professional agitators, that this is the issue rather than police violence and racism, that does play quite well with quite a lot of voters.
It does, and I think that's one of the big concerns about the upcoming election, and one of the reasons why I'm sure Biden is being advised to present his own version of law and order. Even people in the United States who are otherwise very liberal are very concerned about property damage. They're concerned about violence. They're concerned about crime. And so it's a message that plays very well across the political spectrum. And given the current state of U.S. politics, it's a very difficult one to counter effectively when you're trying to reach out to swing voters.
And more broadly across the campaign, we're talking during the Republican convention to many Republican voters who actually have had no contact, really, with the pandemic. They don't know anybody who's had COVID. They certainly haven't had it themselves. They're still focused on the economy, and they tend to see Joe Biden as a man who will shut down the economy for a pandemic, for the sake of a pandemic they don't really recognize. That is also a problem for the Democrats, isn't it?
It is, and unfortunately there are a lot of people who don't believe the science and the research and the severity of the pandemic. Rejecting all of that is part of the political ideology, but we know from looking at countries that try to preserve their economic value instead of shutting down and taking a conservative approach to decreasing transmission, you end up doing neither thing well. And so I think Biden has to be really firm in insisting that we might need to keep the economy closed in order to control transmission, which is, of course, out of control in the United States, even though many people don't have personal experience with it.
Professor, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.